Welcome to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Matt Lutovsky, and we finally made it to Week 16. Although, to be fair, we knew that this week was coming.
Yeah, no, I had a pretty good idea Week 16 was going to... I figured late December is when Week 16.
It's crazy how the forecast worked out that way. But seriously, though, if we can be serious ever, there are several pressing factors going on in this football season right now. A lot of people have Dallas Cowboys running backs in their championship games. Tashard Choice was going to be a trendy pickup going on this week, and I say was going to be because the news trickling out of Dallas now is that all three of those running backs are going to be active.
Yeah, they're saying all three might be active, and Jason Garrett said if all three are active, all three will play. You know, Felix Jones apparently has, I think, a shin injury, but he'll still probably be active. It's a mess. It went from being, I had both Jones and Choice in one team, and it went from like, all right, I'm starting Choice, best matchup he could have. Arizona's the worst run defense in the league, or one of the very worst. This is great. To I can't play him. I can't trust any of those guys at this point. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who's getting carries when, and you just can't. Like if they're active, if all three are active, all three are unplayable.
So you're in a championship game in this league. You have one of those running backs that you were hoping to use. What's your course of action? Is there anybody out there that you would think, hey, you know, he's probably available. I get him before my opponent does.
I mean, really, the only pickups are like, you know, Lance Ball if No-Shot Moreno can't play. I think he's the big one there in Denver as a possible fill-in guy. But otherwise, I mean, you're stuck with what you have on your roster. You know, in my case, I'm playing Jonathan Stewart, who's a very good running back, but is facing the Steelers. And there's something about that PIT by the guy's name, it freaks you out, even though probably shouldn't. I mean, they are the number one run defense. But if it was Baltimore, who's also a very good run defense, wouldn't be as scared. So I'm just getting over it. I'm playing him, and I'm letting the chips fall where they may.
Now, another bit of a controversial thing that's happening in the Minnesota-Philadelphia game. Yeah. We talked about this in a previous edition of the podcast, but Joe Webb is almost certainly to be starting at quarterback for the Vikings, I heard at least. Yeah. Last I heard. And what's interesting about him is that he was drafted in the 6th round this year and was listed as a wide receiver and so in a lot of fantasy leagues he has dual eligibility at quarterback and wide receiver, which is great for those of you who have him because a very mediocre, even poor day at quarterback is going to be better than a lot of wide receivers' abilities, outputs. So if you have Joe Webb, how would you rank him as far as a wide receiver? Because I figure as a quarterback, he's not even on the radar. But as a wide receiver, putting up quarterback numbers, how do you judge that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You know, last week it was all hypothetical, and people were kind of playing with this. And now we've actually seen him play. We've seen him out on the field. I believe last week, despite not starting and missing, I think the first quarter and a half, he put up about 10 fantasy points, which is pretty good. Like you say, for a wide receiver, 10 fantasy points would be a good day. So you're happy with that. And I feel like he's pretty safe bet for 6 to 8. And that's probably a bad day. Obviously, the key is will he get a touchdown. Last week he had a rushing touchdown. No touchdown, he could be down 2 to 3 points, and he could just stink. But, you'd like to think he's probably going to get one by hook or by crook, whether it's passing in garbage time, whether it's running, because we know he's a good runner. Gets you that 6 that way. You know, or even if it's 4, if your league is 4 points for passing TD, he's probably scoring 8-9 points, which makes him a safe. He's not a great wide receiver, but he's a safe wide receiver. If you're in your fantasy title game, that might be what you're looking for.
I mean, if your team was anything like mine, which just made the playoffs and then lost its first game in the playoffs, I was very running back and quarterback and tight end heavy, if that makes any sense, because there's only wide receiver and defense left. But anyway, I was very, very weak at wide receiver. I mean, who am I going to play? Earl Bennett or Joe Webb? I think I'd rather have Joe Webb in that case because his floor, while it's down at the same as Earl Bennett's floor, his median score is to be higher than Bennett's median score. Yeah, that's the big
thing. For me, I picked him up in 2 leagues. I'm currently not planning to start him in either league, but that's because I have pretty good receivers. I have Mike Wallace. I'm playing Mike Wallace over him. You know, I'm playing Miles Austin over him. Now that... You know, this sounds crazy from, how highly thought of Austin was at the beginning of the year. But, like, I'm actually really nervous about Austin this week. Like, he gets, like, 2 catches for 20 yards every game. And he's been very fortunate to get touchdowns, or he had the long touchdown run on Thanksgiving. Like, he's a guy I've seriously considered. Should I sub in Webb for Miles Austin? I just can't bring myself to do it. But, yeah, like you said, if you're someone who regularly starts Johnny Knox as your wide receiver 3, if you start Braylon Edwards maybe as your wide receiver 3.
Those borderline wide receiver 3 guys.
I'd probably play Webb in that case.
Now that actually leads us into something that it might be taken as a bit of levity, but other people might see it as a very serious issue, which is how I want to hear your thoughts on how you conduct yourself after you win a championship, because I mean, or even also after you lose a championship, because if you win a championship with Joe Webb as one of your wide receivers, I think that's a mitigating circumstance for how much you can taunt your buddies.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with taunting is how you feel. Like, if you were the last person into the playoffs, you scored 100, 200 points less than the leader during the regular season, but you somehow got a hot for 3 games and won. You don't say much in that. Like, just don't. You don't have the best team. You were fortunate. You got lucky because you picked up. I'm trying to think, like, who's kind of been, like, you picked up Jay Feely 2 weeks ago. You happen to have him as a kicker. Just something like that happened. That's not.
Here's my personal story, is that Ben Valentine, who also writes for Fantasy Source, he and I had a team several years ago in which we finished something like 5th in the league during the season, snuck into the playoffs, beat the first guy, beat the second guy, and going into the championship game, we were the clear underdogs, but we picked up Ron Dane.
Yeah.
And that was the year that Ron Dane got 3 touchdowns in Week 16 against the Colts. Now, we're very proud of this championship, but we will never taunt anyone about it, because that's not something that you did out of your skill. If you picked up Michael Vick in Week 2, you can taunt everyone about that. If you picked up Ron Dane before Week 16 and he gets 3 touchdowns, just enjoy the wonder of it all.
Yeah, well, and last year there was a lot of those guys, Harrison and Quentin Ganther, and there was a couple other of those guys who were kind of weeks 14, 15, even Jamal Charles a little bit. This year it doesn't seem like there's that many of those guys. It doesn't seem like we're seeing that. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of these guys who've jumped in because of injury. Maybe like Maurice Morris last week, but I'm sure hardly anyone started him because Best was at least active. And like I said, this week maybe Lance Ball's that guy. I don't know. It's a pretty straight up year for that kind of stuff, so that's a good thing, except for Joe Webb.
Yeah, nobody really has that momentum except for Webb a little bit.
Right.
So I guess our end result is that if you pick up Joe Webb and you win your championship with him in your starting lineup, have a little bit of humility.
Yeah.
You're allowed to crow about it, and like talk about how awesome you are, but only for a day or 2.
Yeah, that's it.
That was lucky. Yeah. That was lucky. You admit it. Matt, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
All right.
Have a happy Christmas, everyone.